go ahead and get started. So thanks for joining today's webinar. We're going to be discussing a practical way to approach aligning your applications to a multi-cloud strategy. So, if you're here today, likely curious based on the title or the abstract of the webinar, maybe you've been down the lift and shift path in the past. You might even be considering repatriation, or could be in your second or maybe even third iteration of strategy planning. Either way, I think there's a couple good data points that we'll pull out of the webinar for you folks. Maybe even validation that you're taking the appropriate steps from a decision-making process. So before we kind of dive in to our content here, do a couple quick introductions. So I'm Pat Cannon, I'm the field CTO here at US Signal. Been with US Signal for just about a little bit over 12 years. So a lot of the time I've spent here at US Signal is helping customers transition from more traditional infrastructure procurement and management to the as a service model. So excited to kind of share a little bit of the methodology that we've developed over the years to help customers with that decision-making process. Justin?
Yeah, excited to be a part of this webinar as well. So one of the solution architects on Pat's team, been with US Signal for about 10 years now. The role that I'm in right now is I work with our customers to help them set strategy from a decision-making process and start to rationalize what these types of models look like from a migration standpoint. But have had a lot of roles at US Signal, and was actually one of our first professional services engineers. And in that role, I was tactically focused. So helping customers move and make that migration, lift and shift type migration, refactoring type migrations out of either their on-prem environment or other environments into US Signal infrastructure as a service. So tactically focused, have been hands-on as well. But yeah, glad to be a part of this, Pat.
Yeah, glad to have you. All right. So, a lot of our customers lately have been sharing concerns about rising cloud bills, vendor lock-in, workload latency and reliability pain, and even talent drag, right? Where teams are fighting infrastructure instead of modernization. And, from our perspective, what that typically means is, or what's driving that is, it's a result of a one-size-fits-all approach that kind of ignores the workload needs. So one methodology we use to help solve this is what we call the RFIT. So in this webinar, we'll explain RFIT. We'll look at, as it relates to the workloads themselves, a decision-making process for determining the best RFIT for those workloads. And then we'll walk through a case study, a real live customer kind of example that resulted in pretty significant savings for that particular organization that they can reinvest towards innovation. So, if we kind of think about our infrastructure beliefs, we've got kind of four main areas here. So right workload, right place. What that means is that, the applications in the infrastructure which run those applications should live in the most optimal place. What we'll present today really does rely on subscribing to this idea and abstracting our thought decision process from the underlying infrastructure, focusing on each workload individually. Justin, in your experience, is this a new concept for customers?
No, yeah, that's a great question. We've actually seen this approach and rationalization process play out for a lot of our customers for many years, but maybe some of the language and the terminology that we'll talk about today is new to customers. And let's take a sort of an easy example of this. And it was the first time in my IT career, my technology career, that this is when I was tactically deployed at the time working at a managed service provider. And I would also venture, if not all IT decision makers have made this decision if they've been in the space for some time. But we think about Microsoft BPOS, that was called Business Productivity Online Suite. It was actually the precursor to Microsoft 365. Obviously, that offering has evolved pretty drastically over the years. I think when I was moving customers into the platform, I was questioning why we were even doing it. But the coupling of additional features and functionality around SharePoint, Teams, and the whole Microsoft ecosystem that sort of just works together to provide a lot of value to organizations. There's not a lot of driving business requirements that would point an IT organization today to continue to run Exchange on-prem. If we think about availability, it's expensive. What does it look like to stand up multiple compute clusters to get in a semblance of some sort of reliability, akin to Microsoft 365? Storage is expensive. The lack of collaboration tools if you are only running on-prem. So back to sort of your first point, Pat, of really that's that right workload, right place sort of methodology. We're actually seeing this shift a little bit as well in the authentication space of as smaller or medium-sized IT organizations are looking at SaaS-based alternatives. Really the question that's starting to surface is, do traditional domain controllers still make sense? So we have a lot of customers that are evaluating things like Entra, hosted ID, hosted domain services in lieu of traditional AD.
Yeah, no, for sure. Thanks for that perspective. I actually have a lot of scars from some of those early BPOS migrations, so that's a good example. Okay, moving through kind of some of the other points here. Open source, from our standpoint, is a big piece of our future. Really the Broadcom acquisition of VMware in 2024 driven a lot of customers to question the long-term fit of VMware within their overall strategy. And so we think that open source presents an interesting option, opportunity to reduce costs while maintaining security, performance, and availability. So you'll hear us talk a little bit about our open cloud offering that is based on open source throughout the webinar here. Commercial hypervisors, though, absolutely still have their place. We typically see customers still have some type of requirement where they may have an application that has to run on a certified hypervisor platform or interoperability with specific data protection platforms. So we definitely think that and recognize that commercial hypervisors will continue to have their place. Hyperscalers, we've taken a little bit different kind of view of hyperscalers as it compares to a lot of our competitors. Some folks reject the success of AWS and Azure, but we recognize that, again, as an environment to run a workload for the right place, assuming that the value is there, that hyperscalers have a big role in overall customer multi-cloud strategies. So what's in it for your business, right? Why does this matter? Well, ask ChatGPT the exact same thing and gave us this cool little graphic. I thought that was pretty neat how accurate it was. So in short, the objective is to achieve the best balance of core competencies, right, between your business and US Signal's business. So allows US Signal as a digital infrastructure provider to focus on delivering SLAs and value up to the application layer, and allows you folks to reinvest your time and focus on more strategic IT functions. This is becoming even more critical for our customers as they think through how to leverage AI. So we're hearing firsthand customers are time and budget constrained to align an AI strategy. And so, going through this process that we're going to lay out, identifying an RFIT strategy for your existing workloads is one way that you can, we've seen customers identify quick wins to balance performance, cost, and control. So let's dive right into it here. Let's introduce these 7 R's of workload migration. So the first one, retire. So decommissioning or shutting down workloads that no longer deliver business value. Retaining. So pretty easy concept here. Keeping a workload as it exists today. Maybe it's on-prem, maybe it's with another hosting provider, but keeping it where it's at today. You can always come back and do something to it later. Rehosting. So this is moving a workload as it stands to a cloud or a new environment with very minimal change. A lot of times, we will see customers rehosting onto a different hypervisor. OpenCloud is an example of that. But as it relates to the 7Rs, we assign relocate then as a move from one like hypervisor to another like hypervisor, or physical relocation of equipment into a co-location facility. Replatforming. So this is where we start to get into this idea of making fundamental changes to a workload. So replatforming, you're going to make some optimizations, some tweaks to make the workload better leverage cloud services. So think of this as, you've probably heard this term, lift, tinker, and shift. Refactoring or re-architecting, this is probably the most drastic, right? So you're rewriting or significantly redesigning the workload to take full advantage of cloud native capabilities. So think microservices. When folks refer to serverless, that's typically what this particular RFID is synonymous with. And last but not least, repurchasing, right? So dropping the existing application and replacing it with a cloud native software as a service solution, or possibly even repurchasing a new workload to solve the same business need. So Justin, we kind of introduced the 7Rs. Talk to us, about how we've got this idea of unique applications in our environment. We've abstracted, our thought process from the infrastructure. We've laid out the 7Rs. What's important? How do I evaluate my specific workloads?
Yeah, we're going to jump into some specific examples too from a tactical perspective, but to set some of that additional context that you're talking about, Pat, and really around the evaluation process, you introduced us to the R fit and what it is, but how do we actually classify those workloads is what we're going to get into here. And it's obviously a critical step when you're considering any sort of cloud migration or modernization effort. And if you haven't walked through this process on an application basis, or you don't fully understand your application landscape, do nothing. Don't move. This process is critical and foundational to success of a modernization of the application stack. And what we often find, Pat, is too often that cost becomes sort of the singular focus from a migration standpoint. And what we'll see is there's much more to that equation than just cost. Obviously, cost matters, but if we only take a look at the hard cost, or what we call at Signal here, KTLO, or keeping the lights on, the cost of the infrastructure from an operating standpoint, we miss the overall bigger picture from a modernization perspective. And just quickly going back to the RFIT that we just discussed, if this is really an ongoing process of applications should be interrogated with this dimension that we're going to sort of walk through here in a second on a regular basis. The calculus might have changed from a financial perspective, or business drivers might have changed that sort of change where a particular application has fit previously from an RFIT perspective. And we'll actually see that play out in the customer case study that we're going to review here in a second. But let's start to break down those decisions and how to fit those applications to a particular R. So we'll start with workload criticality, business impact. And this is a pretty easy question when we think about that title of that particular dimension. How critical is the workload to your business? Is it mission critical, or is it ancillary? And why does this even matter that we ask this of a particular application? Because if downtime or performance degradation, directly impacts revenue or damages the brand, that workload might need special consideration from a resiliency perspective, a platform perspective. A good example of this is let's take an online retailer that during the holiday busy season, if that payment processing system goes down during that busy season, that might be a tremendous, revenue loss to that particular online retailer, or erode customer trust. So ensuring that we know the criticality of workloads is sort of number one. Number two is performance and latency requirements. So what we often ask of the application is, does it require high ops from a performance perspective, real-time responsiveness, or proximity to other workloads in the environment, or proximity to other networks within the overall IT estate? And this matters because not all platforms can deliver the same performance profile. Um, you know, uh, some workloads might need to stay on-prem as part of this equation. I often think of OT type environments of where the application stack needs to be close to the manufacturing floor for that to operate efficiently. So that might be a decision to keep that particular application on-prem or in an edge data center with low latency access into that data center or cloud environment, or data gravity as well. Is an application that we're pulling a significant amount of data out of that application. Well, does it make sense to put that into a hyperscale provider where you've got transaction costs around egress bandwidth? That's part of that decision-making process around latency and performance. Pat, out of curiosity, have you seen cases where performance have either forced a hybrid or private cloud type approach?
Yeah, yeah, quite frequently, actually. So, um, US Signal, we've got a tremendous network at our disposal, which gives us an advantage a lot of times to help customers solve that problem. And in fact, the case study that we're going to review has a couple different infrastructure components that fall into that category. So this customer has a Power 10 system that runs their current ERP. And years ago, when they were evaluating the decision to either refresh their current data center that sat on-prem, or move to a service provider model and consume a mix of co-location and or private cloud. Private cloud kind of made a lot of sense because it allowed that private cloud environment, kind of the native x86 workloads, to be adjacent to that Power 10 system. So they could be confident that the performance was going to be adequate. That particular customer also has a VDI deployment that sits in the environment as well. So again, just bringing the delivery of the end user computing experience adjacent to the source environments, because they run kind of traditional thick client applications, was something that had to be done to maintain performance as it relates to network latency.
Yeah, those are great examples. Moving on to, as part of this evaluation of regulatory compliance and security constraints as well, of if your organization has compliance frameworks around HIPAA, PCI, FedRAMP, that might dictate where or how data is stored. So that might push you to, for example, a gov cloud type environment in a hyperscale provider. Failing to meet those requirements open up legal exposure, reputational damage. And they're not just technical details as part of a modernization effort. It's really business risks that have to be managed as part of an overall migration effort. Cost as well, of cost to value ratio or total cost of ownership, going back to that sort of KTLO mindset that we talked about. But let's bring it into context a little bit, because it's not about what you spend. Really, it's also about what you potentially gain too as part of the modernization efforts. Because, for example, moving a workload might, a particular application might unlock scalability, innovation, or just operational efficiency that outweighs either the migration cost or the operational cost to have that workload in a particular environment. Conversely, if the value just isn't there on a TCO perspective, staying put might be the overall smarter choice. Pat, I know that you've worked with customers a lot, especially on the IT investment side of things. Of how often do you see cost overshadowing other critical factors as part of that overall TCO?
It can be common. I think the battle that we've always fought, right, as IT professionals is getting the business to look at IT as an enabler, as opposed to a cost center. So it's not just about, the raw cost, as you pointed out. True TCO includes many other factors, right? So think about what goes into the day-to-day management of your entire infrastructure stack, right? And those are kind of low value activities from a business innovation perspective. I can go out to the job market, I can easily find an engineer that is skilled to manage storage or virtualization, right? But it's much more difficult to find someone that has a good understanding of my current business applications and processes. You'll often hear me describe this as sometimes it's the opportunity cost of not doing something different that needs to, really kind of drive our decision-making process and our actions.
Yeah, and to that point, it's a good sort of segue to the last, dimension that we look at from a evaluation standpoint of operational readiness and governance of does your team have the right skills? Is the right governance model in place? Security controls in place? Because even the best migration plan that you put together can fail if the IT, operational model is immature. So without practices around financial ops or monitoring or strong governance, executing a full refactor or a lift and shift migration, potentially could be risky to the organization. Readiness really determines whether your strategy succeeds or stalls. And Pat, I think we've seen them both, with our customers.
100%. Yeah, I mean that's a great way to describe it, and we'll kind of talk about at the end here, kind of the timeline to make sure that you are ready, right? Because Justin's absolutely right. I love how he says that readiness determines whether your strategy succeeds or stalls.
Yeah, let's jump in. Tactically, just a couple examples that we often walk through with customers and assign in our fit. This modernization process isn't about just moving workloads to the cloud. It's going back to what we just talked about. It's choosing that right path for each application based on the business value, the technical fit, the speed to outcome, all of those dimensions sort of in place. So sort of starting on the left, Active Directory, which I think is the stickiest product that Microsoft has ever shipped. If you've got Microsoft within your environment, you can't get rid of it. It's foundational. And really the rationale here is, companies typically keep an authoritative presence of Active Directory on-prem, and then they extend it into the cloud where they've got presence of other workloads. So it's sort of a twofold recommendation of keep and retain the core service while rehosting and moving additional domain controllers to the cloud. So that might be infrastructure as a service or some other cloud environment. And then also, we see a lot of organizations adopting Microsoft 365, so extending that into Entra ID as well. So really that recommendation around Active Directory to sum that all up is retain and targeted rehost for domain controllers where you've got infrastructure.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. Active Directory is definitely, if you think about all the applications that exist out there, or just Microsoft products in general, they got it right, and it's persevered for many, many years. SQL Server, most folks have SQL in their environment. You either love it or hate it. But moving to a managed database service can reduce your operational overhead and improve resilience. So typical path is to replatform to a managed offering like Azure SQL Managed Instance or Amazon RDS for SQL. You have to ensure that there's feature parity from a validation standpoint, but those can be very viable paths, right? So recommendation with SQL, might be to re-platform it into one of those service models.
Yeah, and this last one's pretty overarching, line of business application. So really, it's a case by case basis. But if the app isn't differentiating, or if there's a mature SaaS alternative, the fastest time to value often is a replacement of that. We're also seeing some cases of refactoring here as well. Of as organizations continue to adopt AI, or introduce other low-code alternatives into their organization. Some of those primary line of business applications are being refactored pretty easily, with the additional technology there. So the typical path is to repurchase and move to SaaS. Obviously, that comes along with some data migration, maybe some process alignment as well as that moves out to a SaaS-based alternative and integration pieces too.
Yep, and we'll see some of these show themselves in the example that we'll move through here in just a second. So just another housekeeping note, if you have questions, go ahead and drop them into the question area of GoToMeeting, and we'll get to those at the end. If we don't have time, we will certainly follow up, because that's what we want to do, right, is drive some interaction here and help our customers solve the problem that's specific to your business. All right, so we kind of explained the business value of the multi-cloud approach, introduced the 7 R's of workload migration. Justin talked us through those key pillars from a decision-making process. So let's take a look at a real-world example. Justin, you want to take us through this?
Yeah, and you've already hit on a little bit too as well, and given the audience a little bit a peek into their infrastructure. But what we're showing here is really just a high level, pre-modernization, their technology spend and investment on a monthly basis. So what we see on the right here is those pillars from a technology perspective, VDI, that you had talked about, their users accessing their workloads hosted in infrastructure as a service, interacting with that Power 10 environment as well. Security spend, that Power 10 infrastructure, that spend on a monthly basis. Networking components, again, sort of some of the plumbing pieces that go into an overall solution, data protection, monitoring, and infrastructure. To give some of the backstory on this particular organization, they've long relied on that IBM ecosystem. You talked about it, being, hosting one of their primary line of business applications, their ERP, and it's been at the core of their business for decades now, hosting those critical applications. That line of business application, Lotus Notes, both from a collaboration standpoint and database. So a lot of their core business processes are in Lotus Notes databases. So it served them well for that several decades that it's been in the environment, but it has now, as they've taken a look at remodernization, it has brought some challenges. So high maintenance costs, high infrastructure costs, limited agility, poor integration as they've looked at moving to other alternatives. And what you see from a spend is that's their largest spend category, which obviously shows their continued dependence on that hardware alongside of the other investments that support that on a monthly basis. So as part of this organization's modernization journey, they chose to repurchase that primary line of business application that sits on Power 10. So looking at their full collaboration suite, and how that's going to transformationally change their workflow and their business processes. And they've decided to not further invest in Lotus Notes and Power Systems, and they're moving those Lotus Notes databases into Microsoft 365, into the Power platform, preserving that logic that they've had in place, but also leveraging the low-code alternatives as a replacement. Collaboration has already moved into Microsoft 365, so it's really just creating that unified user experience to access all of the data in one platform, in one ecosystem. As you can imagine, this has had pretty significant downstream effects because of that reliance on the Power system. New backup strategies, optimizing their network, looking at security spend. but it has poised this particular organization for better scalability, resiliency, better collaboration, and a more predictable cost model. And because of that modernization and that downstream effect, this led us to walk through that RFIT process that we just discussed, and it really examined all of this particular customer's traditional monolithic applications that today run within infrastructure as a service, as virtual machines. Pat gave some of this context, but we've worked with this customer for quite a few years. We supported their rehosting and their modernization effort when they moved from on-prem into cloud. But going back to that earlier point of needing to continue to interrogate workloads and reevaluate the strategy, business drivers have changed, and they're walking through this modernization process again. IT estates are never static. They always require ongoing adaptation. So as we walk through this process, this is sort of a high-level overview of determining from an environment classification standpoint, breakdown of those 55 workloads that are running within infrastructure. About 5% of them are considered development for them. And this might drive from a platform perspective where they end up living from an infrastructure as a service standpoint. 21% are test, and 72% are production. So really the key takeaway there is majority of these workloads sit in production for them. They're critical to the business operations and obviously require careful planning as we look at what a migration potentially looks like for them. And then we walk through that RFIT with them. So looking at those recommended actions of that 55 workloads that are currently running, 35 of them, about 63%, can be moved with pretty minimal changes. Again, sort of that fastest way to value, most cost-effective approach from a migration standpoint. And then about 36% of them can be decommissioned. So workloads that were supporting that Power 10 environment, decommissioning those, so reducing a lot of the complexity and cost within their environment. So really the big picture here is, it's not a one-time event. This is the second modernization that this particular organization has gone through in the last decade. And then as part of this process, looking at alternatives from a rehosting perspective, those 35 workloads that are going to remain in place. Well, what does the overall capacity look like from a CPU perspective, total RAM perspective, and storage as well? And then let's start to break down that cost of, well, if we were to lift and shift these and rehost them to Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure or US Signal Open Cloud, really breaking down the costs of different infrastructure environments. And Pat, you worked with me on this particular project. Can you walk the audience through how we got to these numbers?
Yep, for sure. So we actually used what US Signal has available for any customer to kind of take a look at. It's our cloud cost comparison calculator. So this is out on our website. We'll get a link out to the attendees. But you can take any RB Tools export, even a live optics or the Nutanix collector report in Excel format. You load it into the sample set here, calculate your pricing, and it'll spit out a really good overview of your entire workloads, what instance it's going to map it to in AWS or Azure, and then also give you a really good cost breakdown, right, of what it would cost to run those virtual machines inside of any of these different cloud environments. You can mess with your term length here too to get to show specific discount percentages. I'd always recommend exporting it to a PDF because you get those discount tiers for open cloud already with this particular report. And then this is a good takeaway, right, that you can use for planning purposes, sharing it with your leadership just to potentially identify a way to take what you have today from a virtual estate and move it into an open source solution like we talked about on the front end. So, really just kind of a tool that can, help you model what those costs might look like, in an open source model.
Yeah, that's a fantastic tool that I've been working with our customers a lot, Pat, to walk them through. You've essentially just created something that might take a week to go out and develop those costs of look at Azure, build it through the pricing calculator.
Yep.
You've shrunk that down to a 15-minute exercise to get a high level estimation of costs. So really, the effort to do that is pretty low, and you've got a lot of detail to sort of start your decision-making process on.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, and we pull those pricing elements in directly from the hyperscalers, and our knowledge of VMware costs as well. So they're very true.
Yeah. Awesome. Let's take a look at the proposed end state as part of this modernization effort. So the chart on the left compares current monthly investment against proposed monthly investment after all of the modernization efforts. Obviously, notice the complete reduction in blue being existing investment, black being proposed investment. The complete reduction in that power, the IBM power related costs, and Lotus Notes support. Those savings are coming from retiring that particular platform, like we talked about, and moving that to a SaaS-based alternative to replace that functionality. And we see the infrastructure cost and the overall investment, decreased about $30,000 a month in infrastructure spend. But we see other targeted investments in other areas around security and monitoring. But really being able to reallocate the time and the budget that this particular organization has to initiatives that they've now put on the table around AI and app dev initiatives, that power systems migration as well into Microsoft 365. So loosening some of the budget a little bit to allow them to focus on where they're able to create more value on the process side of things. So really it's not just a cost shift, it's a strategic allocation that supports the organization's entire modernization efforts.
Yep. Yeah, pretty exciting results. I think a couple other things to point out on the VDI front. They had a significant reduction in their need for virtual desktops. They actually moved to a strategy where they were using laptops for their entire user base. That was mainly to reduce cost, but they do still have some requirements for contractors, application developers to remote in a secure fashion. And so that's where we've positioned our desktop as a service offering that's also based on open cloud. And then, the reduction in cost on the infrastructure as a service side, they were able to retire some workloads and repurchase some. I think there was a virtual phone system that existed in that environment, if I remember correctly, Justin. But then also the balance of those would be hosted in open cloud as well, right? So just taking advantage of that open source solution to provide even more savings for the business. All right, so how do you get started on this? And more importantly, I think from our perspective, when should you get started? I've laid out here kind of a 6-month period, and assigned some timelines based on different phases of this process. And these are really kind of best case scenario estimates for each stage. So think about it this way. We're coming into the holiday season. I don't know about the rest of you, but I definitely spent many holidays doing IT projects. So typically when the business isn't working, IT is. And so, you really have to rewind and start that process in June, right? At the latest. There's tremendous amount of time that needs to go into the discovery. Thinking back to Justin's comments earlier, just around, planning will determine, whether your project succeeds or stalls. That discovery process, we're talking about every workload in your portfolio you got to partner with the business units and the stakeholders, that interact with those applications on a daily basis. So getting folks, gathered around this idea, defining the goals, inventorying all of your applications and mapping out dependencies can take significant time. That analysis process that Justin laid out earlier, that's usually fairly lengthy as well. I mean, think about having to build a TCO for each individual workload. That's the level of effort that we're talking about here before you can move into, that RFIT placement and scoring process. And then, if you're going to be adopting services from a service provider, a lot of time there's lead time, that we have to consider. So getting those orders placed in time, as a service provider, sometimes we have to augment. So that requires us to purchase equipment, configure it and burn it in. You're going to want to have some time for planning the migration, doing security baselining, data protection baselining. There's just a whole host of things to work through during this time period. And then once you get to the point of migration, you've got a pretty lengthy time usually for doing data replication and then testing, and kind of end user acceptance testing as well, and determining, refining that migration strategy. We'll probably do a follow-on webinar to this because that migration piece is super critical to the success of these projects. And it bears probably another 45 minutes of focus. But the moral of the story: get started early. Pull us in. We're happy to lend all of the experience that we've learned over the years helping customers with this, and we'd love to tackle your problem specifically. So with that, I think we've reached the end of our time. Let's see if we can find any questions here real quick, Justin. And we've only got a few minutes. We'll follow up on the question, any of the questions that are in the chat. Otherwise, you've got Justin and I's contact information there on the screen. Please reach out to us. This is what we do day in and day out, right? So what gets us going is solving customer problems, and that's what we're here for. So Justin, thanks so much for your time, man. Appreciate you taking the time out and sharing some of your expertise on this subject.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, Pat. Thank you.
Likewise.